Chapter 1. The Obsidian Heart of the City. The storm came on swift, bruised wings, lashing the Gothic spires and industrial smokestacks of Viridian City. Rain, thick as arterial blood, sluiced down the black stone facade of Villa Moretti, washing the gargoyles perched on its battlements, making them weep shadows. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of polished wood, old money, and the subtle metallic tang of an empire held by an iron fist. Don Vittorio Moretti, the undisputed ruler of this shadowed realm, sat ensconced in his velvet-draped study, a half-empty glass of crimson Amarone clutched in a hand heavy with rings. Thunder cracked, rattling the stained-glass windows depicting grim-faced Moretti ancestors. Vittorio, a man whose presence could curdle wine and silence a room with a glance, merely grunted, his gaze fixed on a framed photograph, a young woman, Isabella, her beauty ethereal even in the fading light. Suddenly, a sharp, searing pain exploded in his chest, a vice grip tightening around his ancient, obsidian heart. The glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the Persian rug like 1,000 tiny confessions. He gasped, a guttural sound that was quickly swallowed by the roaring storm. His breath hitched, ragged and desperate, as he clawed at the ornate lapels of his smoking jacket. The world tilted, the room spinning into a vortex of shadows and flickering candlelight. His eyes, usually sharp and piercing, glazed over, fixed on the photograph as if seeing it for the first time, or perhaps for the last. A name, whispered on a dying breath, escaped his lips, lost to the tempest. Isabella. Then, with a shudder that rocked his formidable frame, Don Vittorio Moretti slumped forward, his head resting against the cool, dark wood of his desk, his reign brought to an abrupt, silent end. The city, oblivious, continued to drown in the storm, unaware that its heart had just ceased to beat. The discovery was made hours later, when the storm had begun to recede, leaving behind a sky of bruised purples and a city shimmering with slick, dark reflections. Giacomo, Vittorio's most loyal and feared capo, found him. The sight of the unmoving Don, so utterly devoid of life, sent a jolt of primal fear through the seasoned enforcer. Giacomo, a man who had seen rivers of blood flow through Viridian, felt a cold dread creep up his spine. His first instinct was to confirm, to touch the cold skin, to deny the impossible. But the stillness, the unnatural quiet that had settled over the study, spoke volumes. The Don was gone. The news spread through the mansion like a contagion, whispered behind cupped hands, carried on the heels of hushed servants. Shock reverberated through the gilded halls, then a chilling wave of uncertainty. Vittorio Moretti was eternal, a force of nature. His sudden demise left a gaping void, a raw wound in the very fabric of their empire. Isabella, clad in a silken nightgown, her hair a cascade of dark waves, was ushered into the study. Her face, usually a mask of serene composure, fractured. A single, choked sob escaped her, quickly stifled, replaced by a brittle, almost venomous control. She knelt beside him, her hand hovering over his still form, a strange mix of grief and something unreadable flickering in her eyes. "Vittorio," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the lingering grumble of thunder. Her fingers traced the line of his cold jaw, a touch both tender and strangely detached. The funeral was an elaborate, morbid spectacle, a Gothic ballet of mourning. Hundreds gathered in the Moretti family crypt, a sprawling mausoleum beneath the mansion, lit by thousands of flickering candles. Black roses adorned every surface, their petals wilting under the oppressive weight of grief and unspoken anxieties. The air was thick with incense and the heavy perfume of lilies. Capos from every corner of Viridian City, men with eyes like flint and hands that knew violence intimately, stood rigid, their faces grim and unreadable. They paid their respects, but beneath the veneer of somber reverence, a restless current of speculation ran through them. Who would fill the void? Who would dare wear the crown of the Obsidian King? Lucien Moretti, Vittorio's only son, stood at the head of the procession, a figure of stark contrast to the imposing shadow his father cast. Young, lean, and exquisitely tailored in a black suit that seemed to swallow him whole, Lucien possessed a refined elegance that was more academic than menacing. His eyes, the same piercing blue as his mother's, held a raw grief, but also a quiet determination. He moved with a grace that spoke of classical training rather than street brawls, a stark difference from the brutish power Vittorio exuded. The murmurs began subtly, hushed conversations among the more cynical capos. "He doesn't have his father's fire," one whispered to another, his gaze lingering on Lucien's slightly pale complexion. "Too soft." As Vittorio's heavy, oak casket was lowered into its final resting place, etched with the Moretti crest, a coiled serpent striking through a stylized heart. Lucien felt the weight of an entire empire descend upon his shoulders. He was Don now, by right of birth. But the throne felt cold, alien. He looked at his mother, Isabella, draped in black lace that seemed to absorb all light. Her gaze, usually so distant, met his for a fleeting moment, a flicker of something he couldn't quite decipher. Pride? Warning? Or perhaps a secret grief that ran deeper than his own? The candles sputtered, casting dancing shadows on the grim faces of the Capos. The mythic legacy of Vittorio Moretti was cemented, but the whispers had already begun. The first insidious tendrils of doubt, like vines of poison ivy, were already coiling around the roots of Lucien's nascent reign. The storm had passed, but a different kind of tempest was brewing, one that threatened to tear apart the very foundations of the Moretti Empire. Lucien, standing on the precipice of his new destiny, felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the chill of the crypt. The blood that bound shadows was about to be tested. Chapter 2. The Whispers in the Marble Halls. The scent of stale incense still clung to the air in Villa Moretti, a ghostly reminder of the funeral, but the silence that followed was far more unsettling. Lucien, now officially Don Moretti, moved through the sprawling mansion like a stranger in his own home. The gilded halls, once just opulent corridors, now felt like an endless labyrinth designed to highlight his solitude. Every portrait of a grim-faced ancestor, every heavy tapestry depicting ancient battles, seemed to scrutinize him, judging his every step. He found himself retreating to his father's study, the very room where Vittorio had drawn his last breath. He sat in the imposing, high-backed chair, its leather still imprinted with the weight of his father's formidable presence. The chair felt too large, the desk too vast, the empire too heavy. He was a student of history, a connoisseur of rare books, not a man forged in the fires of the underworld. The Capos, the pillars of the Moretti family, pledged their fealty in hushed, formal ceremonies. Giacomo, Vittorio's loyal right hand, was the first. His eyes, usually cold and unreadable, held a flicker of something akin to concern as he looked at Lucien. "My loyalty, Don Lucien, is absolute," he stated, his voice a gravelly rumble. Others followed, each delivering their oath, their faces carefully schooled. Yet, Lucien could feel it, the subtle hesitation, the microscopic shift in their gazes, the almost imperceptible air of wait and see. They honored Vittorio's legacy, but did they truly respect him? He longed for his father's unwavering gaze, the stern nod that commanded obedience. All he had was the echoes of a life he wasn't quite prepared to inherit. The whispers began subtly, like the rustling of silk in an empty room, carried on the drafts that snaked through the mansion's vast corridors. At first, they were indistinct, mere fragments of hushed conversations overheard from servants, quickly dismissed as gossip. Then they grew bolder, more defined, slipping into the conversations of lesser Capos, their eyes darting nervously when Lucien passed. "Lucien is not Vittorio's blood," one whispered, a phrase that struck Lucien with a cold, unsettling dread. He tried to ignore them, to dismiss them as the venom of jealous rivals or resentful subordinates. But the words, once heard, burrowed deep, planting seeds of doubt in the fertile ground of his insecurity. The full weight of the rumor crashed down on him during a private meeting with Salvatore, a shrewd, calculating capo who controlled the docks, a vital artery of the Moretti Empire. Salvatore, a man whose loyalty was known to bend with the wind, leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. "Don Lucien," he began, his voice deceptively smooth, "there are stories, tales of your mother, Isabella, and Lorenzo Ravelli. Whispers that you are his son, not Vittorio's." The words hit Lucien like a physical blow. The Ravelli family, the Morettis' oldest and fiercest rivals, their names synonymous with bloodshed and betrayal. To suggest he, the new Don Moretti, was the son of their patriarch, Lorenzo Ravelli, was an unthinkable blasphemy. His jaw tightened. "These are lies, Salvatore," Lucien said, his voice clipped, colder than he intended. "Propaganda designed to sow discord." Salvatore merely shrugged, a faint, unsettling smirk playing on his lips. "Perhaps. But lies, Don Lucien, often have a kernel of truth. And this particular lie, it questions everything. It questions your right to this throne." He paused, letting the implication hang heavy in the air, a silent challenge. "The men, they talk. They need to know their Don is truly Moretti. Blood is everything in this city." Lucien dismissed Salvatore, his mind reeling. He paced the length of his father's study, the whispers echoing louder now, transforming from vague anxieties into a tangible, suffocating fear. A Ravelli on the Moretti throne. The notion was grotesque, a cruel jest of fate. He had always believed himself to be Vittorio's son, raised under his imposing shadow, educated in the ways of their world, however reluctantly. Now the very foundation of his identity, his lineage, was being torn asunder. His elegant hands clenched into fists. He needed answers. He needed to know the truth. He found Isabella in the garden, a secluded patch of dark roses and weeping angels carved from marble. She stood, a solitary figure in black, tending to a particularly thorny bush. Her beauty, even in her grief, was arresting, an ethereal quality that belied the steel in her gaze. "Mother," Lucien began, his voice strained, "we need to talk." Isabella turned, her expression unreadable. "About what, Lucien?" Her voice was soft, melodic, yet held an underlying current of warning. "The rumors," he pressed, "about me. About father and Lorenzo Ravelli." He watched her closely, searching for any flicker of guilt, any tell. For a moment, Isabella's composure wavered, a fleeting shadow passing over her eyes. Her fingers, adorned with a single, exquisite emerald ring, tightened around the stem of a rose. "Rumors are poison, Lucien," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "They are designed to destroy. Your father dealt with them with strength. You must do the same. But are they true?" Lucien demanded, his voice rising, the carefully constructed calm beginning to crack. Was I truly born of a Ravelli?" Isabella's gaze hardened, becoming cold and impenetrable. "You are Vittorio Moretti's son," she stated, her voice devoid of emotion, a finality that brooked no further argument. "And you will rule as such. Do not let the whispers break you, Lucien. Your father would never have allowed it." She turned back to her roses, dismissing him with an icy finality that chilled him to the bone. Lucien left the garden, his head spinning. Her denial was absolute, yet it felt hollow, too rehearsed. The way she had flinched at Ravelli's name, the momentary break in her poise, it gnawed at him. He was heir and enemy, Moretti and Ravelli. The realization, if true, meant he was a walking paradox, a ticking time bomb at the heart of the empire. He looked at his reflection in a polished marble pillar, seeing not just his own face, but the looming shadows of two formidable men, Vittorio and Lorenzo, their destinies intertwined with his own. The throne of the Morettis, once a symbol of power, now felt like a cage, built on a foundation of lies. He had to know. The whispers had become a roar in his mind, and he could no longer ignore them. He would seek the truth, even if it meant shattering his own world. Chapter 3. Echoes in the Crypt and the Gilded Cage. The denial from Isabella only fueled Lucien's burning need for answers. Her cold, unwavering certainty, devoid of genuine emotion, struck him as a performance, a carefully constructed facade. He saw the guarded flicker in her eyes, the subtle tightening of her hand around the rose stem. It wasn't the reaction of a woman defending her honor from slander, but rather one meticulously protecting a devastating secret. The mansion, once a sanctuary, now felt like a gilded cage, every shadow a potential hiding place for the truth, every silence heavy with unspoken lies. He found himself drawn back to the crypt, to the cold, silent resting place of his supposed father. The air was heavy with the scent of decay and the lingering perfume of funeral lilies. Thousands of candles had been replaced by a few eternal flames, casting long, dancing shadows that made the Moretti ancestors carved into the sarcophagi seem to stir. Lucien moved among them, his footsteps echoing eerily. He paused before Vittorio's tomb, the coiled serpent crest glinting in the dim light. "Father," he whispered, his voice hoarse, "who was I to you? A son or a weapon?" The question hung in the frigid air, unanswered. His gaze fell upon a less prominent sarcophagus, tucked away in a shadowed alcove. It belonged to Vittorio's uncle, Marco, a man known in family lore as a scholar and a recluse, who had died mysteriously decades ago. Unlike the more martial carvings on other tombs, Marco's bore a small, intricately carved raven, a symbol he remembered from old family tales, linked to forbidden knowledge and hidden passages within the mansion. As Lucien examined it, his fingers brushed against a barely perceptible seam in the stone, a hidden catch. With a click, a small compartment sprang open, revealing not bones, but a tarnished silver locket and a brittle, leather-bound diary. His heart hammered against his ribs. This felt significant, a direct thread to the past. He quickly pocketed both items, his pulse quickening with a mixture of apprehension and grim anticipation. This was the kind of secret his father, a man who built his empire on secrets, would have kept. He returned to his study, locking the door behind him. The locket was cold against his palm, engraved with a delicate I and V, Isabella and Vittorio. But when he clicked it open, it held not Vittorio's portrait, but a miniature painting of a younger Isabella, radiant and smiling, next to a man whose face was unmistakably Lorenzo Ravelli. The sight sent a cold dread through him, confirming the whispers in the most brutal way. His mother, with their greatest enemy. He turned to the diary. Its pages were yellowed with age, the script a spidery, elegant hand that he didn't recognize as Vittorio's. It was Marco's diary. The initial entries were mundane observations of Viridian life, but as he delved deeper, Marco's meticulous notes began to unravel a horrifying truth. Dates, events, hushed conversations, all pointing to a clandestine affair between Isabella Moretti and Lorenzo Ravelli, not years ago, but coinciding with Lucien's own birth. Marco, the recluse, had been an accidental witness, a quiet observer of the family's deepest secrets. He wrote of Isabella's visits to a secluded Ravelli estate, of Lorenzo's infatuation, and most damningly, of the undeniable physical resemblance between the infant Lucien and a young Lorenzo. The blood of the raven will mix with the serpent, an entry chillingly read, a union that will either destroy or redefine us. The revelation was a hammer blow, shattering the last vestiges of his identity. He was Ravelli. The enemy's blood coursed through his veins, yet he sat on the Moretti throne. The irony was a bitter taste in his mouth. He was both heir and enemy, a living contradiction. The betrayal, the deceit, the sheer audacity of it, was almost unbearable. Vittorio, the man who had raised him, whose shadow he had always lived under, was not his father. The profound sense of loss mingled with a furious resentment. All those years, all the lessons, the expectations, they were built on a lie. He knew he couldn't confront Isabella with the diary. She would deny it, destroy it, twist it. He needed irrefutable proof, something beyond an old man's diary, however compelling. The very foundations of his world had been ripped away, leaving him adrift in a sea of suspicion and doubt. He looked at the locket again, the youthful faces of his true parents smiling back at him, strangers he had never truly known. He felt a profound sense of isolation. The Moretti name, the Moretti power, felt like a stolen inheritance. He was a fraud, and the thought was a searing brand on his soul. Lucien paced, the marble floors cold beneath his feet. The weight of his discovery was crushing. His loyalty was fractured. His identity, a cruel illusion. What was he to do? Embrace the Ravelli blood and tear down the Moretti name? Or, as his presumed father would have done, claim the identity thrust upon him, ruling as a dawn of shadows and lies, a wolf in sheep's clothing within his own empire? The thought was intoxicating, dangerous, and utterly terrifying. He had to choose, but the path forward was shrouded in darkness, each step fraught with peril. The world outside, the Gothic metropolis that had always seemed so distant and dangerous, now felt dangerously close, its shadows reaching into the very heart of Villa Moretti, into the very soul of its new, illegitimate dawn. He held the diary tight, its secrets a burning ember in his hands, knowing that with this truth, his life, and the fate of both families, would never be the same. The cliff of his past had crumbled, and he was left dangling, caught between two warring bloodlines. Chapter 4. The Serpent and the Raven's Dance. The diary became Lucien's constant, clandestine companion. He devoured its contents, not just for the devastating revelations about his parentage, but for the intricate details of Viridian's underworld, of the feuds and alliances, the betrayals and triumphs that Vittorio had orchestrated. Marco's entries painted a vivid, unsettling picture of the city, and a disturbingly nuanced portrait of his supposed father. Vittorio was a chess master, always several moves ahead, his actions often driven by motives far deeper than simple power. This gave Lucien a new lens through which to view the present. His mother, Isabella, remained a sphinx. She continued her duties as the matriarch with an unsettling serenity, her composure never cracking, even under Lucien's increasingly scrutinizing gaze. He watched her at family dinners, her elegant hand gracefully lifting a wine glass, her eyes distant, yet missing nothing. He tried to catch her off guard, dropping subtle hints about the Ravellis, about old family stories, but she merely met his probes with an unyielding mask, deflecting every attempt to chip away at her defenses. Her silence was a fortress, her poise a weapon. He realized then that confronting her directly would yield nothing but more lies. He needed to find evidence beyond Marco's diary, something irrefutable, something that would force her hand. His search began in the most obvious place, Vittorio's personal effects. The study, once forbidden territory, was now his. He spent hours sifting through documents, ledgers, and hidden compartments. The deeper he delved, the more he understood the labyrinthine mind of the man who had raised him. Vittorio had kept meticulous records of everything: financial transactions, intel on rival families, even encrypted correspondence. But nowhere did he find anything directly related to his birth. No mention of Isabella's affair, no acknowledgement of his Ravelli blood. It was as if Vittorio had deliberately erased that part of his history. The capos, meanwhile, were growing restless. Salvatore's whispers had spread like wildfire. The absence of an heir with pure Moretti blood was a weakness, a chink in the armor of their empire. Meetings were tense, their eyes constantly flicking to Lucien, measuring him, judging his every decision. He felt the shift in power, the subtle undermining of his authority. He needed to consolidate his control, but how could he command loyalty when he himself questioned his very right to rule? One evening, Giacomo, Vittorio's most loyal capo, sought him out. Giacomo had served Vittorio for 40 years, his loyalty unwavering. "Don Lucien," he said, his voice unusually grave, "the men talk. They speak of the Ravellis, of a long-ago affair. They are testing you." Lucien looked at the old enforcer, a man who had been a shadowy presence throughout his life. "Giacomo," he began, his voice low, "if these rumors were true, if I was not Vittorio's son by blood, would your loyalty waver?" Giacomo's face remained impassive for a long moment, his eyes like chips of flint. Then he spoke. "My oath was to Don Vittorio, to the Moretti family. Blood is important, yes. But legacy is forged in action, in power. Don Vittorio was a master of legacy. He built this. If you rule it, if you protect it, then you are the Don." The answer was both reassuring and deeply unsettling. It spoke of pragmatic loyalty, but also hinted at a deeper, unspoken understanding of Vittorio's machinations. Lucien pressed further. "Did Vittorio ever speak to you about my mother's past? About the Ravellis?" Giacomo hesitated, his gaze drifting to the shadows pooling in the corners of the study. Don Vittorio kept his own counsel, Don Lucien. He was a man of many secrets. He built this empire from shadows, and he knew how to use shadows to his advantage. He paused, then added, "He was a powerful man, Don Lucien. More powerful than anyone knew. He bent fate to his will." The conversation, while cryptic, cemented a chilling realization in Lucien's mind. Vittorio knew. He had to have known. Giacomo's words, the subtle inflections, implied a knowledge of his father's deeper strategies, a hint that Vittorio's actions were not merely reactive, but meticulously planned. The idea sent a shiver down Lucien's spine. To raise a child, knowing he was the blood of your greatest enemy, to place him on your throne, that was a level of calculated cruelty, of supreme vindictiveness, that staggered Lucien. It wasn't just about spite, it was about humiliation, about a final, grotesque triumph. He felt a profound sense of horror, mixed with a strange, dark admiration for Vittorio's sheer audacity. His father wasn't just a powerful man, he was a psychological tormentor, even in death. This twist, this monstrous plan, transformed his perception of Vittorio from a formidable figure to something akin to a Gothic puppet master. Lucien was the puppet, and his strings were tangled in the blood of two rival families. That night, sleep offered no escape. His dreams were vivid, disturbing tapestries of his two fathers. Vittorio, a looming, silent shadow, his eyes burning with an unholy satisfaction. Lorenzo Ravelli, a fleeting, almost benevolent presence, his face obscured by mist, reaching out to him. The two figures wrestled for control of his soul, their shadows twisting and merging until he couldn't tell where one began and the other ended. He woke in a cold sweat, the heavy velvet drapes of his bedroom a suffocating darkness. He had to seek out the Ravellis. Not for revenge, not yet, but for the other half of the truth, the perspective from the other side. If Vittorio had truly known, then the Ravellis must be aware of the possibility, or perhaps they too had been deliberately misled. He needed to understand Lorenzo Ravelli, the man who was his biological father, and the family that was his true blood. The city outside, a sprawling canvas of Gothic grandeur and hidden alleys, seemed to call to him, offering answers in its shadowed corners. His journey to uncover the full truth had just begun, and it would take him into the very heart of the enemy's territory. He was on the precipice of a choice, a decision that would redefine him, tear down an empire, or forge a new, terrifying legacy. The blood that bound shadows was about to erupt. The silent crypt of Villa Moretti may have claimed the body of Don Vittorio, but his shadow looms larger than ever, twisting the foundations of the empire he built. Lucien, the grieving son, has been cast into a maelstrom of deceit, discovering a truth that redefines his very existence. He is a Don without a birthright, a Ravelli in serpent's clothing, his identity shattered by the ink of a dead man's diary. But the whispers of a long-dead affair have given way to a far more terrifying possibility. That this was no secret kept from Vittorio, but a secret kept by him. That Lucien's entire life has been the final, cruel move in a dead man's game, a weapon forged to humiliate an enemy from beyond the grave. Now, caught between the ghosts of two fathers, Lucien turns his gaze from the gilded cage he calls home towards the hostile heart of the Ravelli territory. He seeks not just answers, but the other half of his own fractured soul. What happens when an heir, raised on lies, confronts the truth of his blood? Will he be the pawn his father intended, or will he become the master of a new, terrifying destiny? The deadliest secrets are still buried in the shadows, waiting.